The breaking news yet again, you will see history happen before your very eyes. Within the hour, Boris Johnson is expected to leave the doors of number 10 for the final time as Prime Minister. He will resign as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. You've heard that all night. Now, let me explain, because there's a process that you need to understand here about how this has come about. Now, like Australia, the UK does not have a direct election system. Instead, the Prime Minister is chosen by others, not directly by normal voters. Now, in this country, we have a scenario where the MPs of the governing party end up picking their Prime Minister. In the UK, what happens is that when it's the Conservative MPs will decide between two people who could become Prime Minister, and then the paid up and proud members of the Conservative Party across the entire UK have the chance to then choose who becomes party leader and, by virtue of having a majority in the Parliament, becomes the Prime Minister. Now, the reason Boris Johnson goes in the next hour is because, as you know, there was a vote a few weeks ago where the majority of his backbench didn't want him to be there. But there are a huge number of people who have ministerial or deputy ministerial positions in the UK government. In the past 24 hours, more than 50 of those people have said that they will not serve under Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. So even as Boris Johnson has tried to replace some of those people, the people on the backbench say, we won't take those jobs, therefore you can't have a government without a ministry, and therefore Boris Johnson has no other option other than to resign, something that, again, he will do within the next hour. So right now it's 8 o'clock Eastern. Here in Australia, it is 11 o'clock right now in the UK. The expectations are that he will speak very close to midday. Either side, I don't know. But the expectation is that one of the reasons this is dragging out today is because there's a conversation happening about whether Boris Johnson leaves number 10 as Prime Minister today, or whether he will be able to effectively stay on as caretaker Prime Minister until the Tory party is able to pick its next leader. Now, several people on the backbench, and understandably the opposition parties, believe that can't happen. They believe that Boris Johnson has to go today, and that Dominic Raab, the current Deputy Prime Minister, should step up to be the caretaker Prime Minister for a process that can take as long as 3 months to pick an alternative leader, because there are those two elections. There's the party room election, and then there is the vote of Conservative members. Now, the Conservative membership loves Boris Johnson. They will be furious about what is taking place right now. But obviously, after a series of scandals, and I'll detail some of these because in Australia, you might think this is something to do with Partygate. This isn't necessarily about Partygate. Instead, there is a straw that has broken the camel's back, and I'll explain what that was and why ministers themselves stepped forward and did so in the past couple of days. But we are on tonight for 2 hours because we want to be there for either side of the speech. We will have full coverage with experts from the UK, including our very own Piers Morgan, will join us live from London a little later. But that is the scene right now out the front of number 10. Now, Boris Johnson is an example of the type of politician that is crash or crash through. Now, generally speaking, people who are crash or crash through politicians can have incredible success. The end is always ugly, but they crash through when they're running for the Mayor of London. They crash through when they become the Foreign Secretary. They crash through when they become the leadership contender. They crash through as a Prime Minister. Now, Boris Johnson, of course, was at one time a biographer for Winston Churchill. And like anyone who knows any history about Winston Churchill, you fight till your last breath, to your last moment, to your last bullet, on the beaches and all the rest of it. Now, of course, Winston Churchill was able to be Prime Minister of the UK twice. Whether Boris Johnson thinks he can do that or not, who knows? But again, the maths just doesn't work for him. He has 80-seat majority in the Parliament, yet because he can't fill those 50 separate ministries and people won't join from the backbench into his government, he has no other option than to resign today. Now, there are a few little expectations coming out of the UK about what might happen if Boris Johnson goes into caretaker mode. With what would he do with those couple of months as Prime Minister? Now, he has the full authority as the Prime Minister, but presumably wouldn't get the capacity to pass much through the parliament. Well, the plan today was that Boris Johnson was going to make a major economic statement. That major economic statement was going to include major tax cuts. Now, there are still some assumptions inside people in the UK that he still may push ahead with that if he remains as the Prime Minister. There's some expectation too that if he remains as the caretaker Prime Minister, he may well put his hand up again in the leadership ballot of the Tory party. Now, these are the extreme scenarios, but when somebody is dragging as hard as Boris Johnson is, despite the fact that the maths and the politics doesn't work for him, the idea that he still remains fully functioning Prime Minister after he resigns, just like the American president, after they lose an election, they remain in power for the end of November, all of December, until the 20th of January. There's still plenty of time to do something, well, at least with the stroke of the pen. But as I say, that's the news tonight. In the next hour, you will hear from Boris Johnson at number 10. When we see more movement, you will see it live on the screen. We will keep a live shot up of number 10 so you can see if that door starts to move. We will, of course, break into anything else that we are planning to do tonight. But there is a lot to get to about Australia tonight. We've got some great people here in our special 2-hour edition of Paul Murray Live, including major announcement today from the FBI and MI5. They have come forward to say to the Western world about how big a threat China poses to world order. Now, you may not think that this is breaking news, but this is as big a news as you can get when the intelligence organisations are willing to go public at a time when China has never felt more bolshy. Now, as you know, the Prime Minister is about to leave Australia again, this time to go to the Pacific Islands Forum. Now, China, as you know, has been trying to scoop up those Pacific Islands, and they are not invited to the Pacific Islands Forum. They are not invited to be there with all of the different prime ministers and ministers representing the Pacific Islands. But they are turning up anyway. They have set up their own version of the Pacific Islands Forum. And that's why this matters for us here in Australia. James Patterson is a man who knows about national defence, national security, and we will talk to him a little bit later in the show. Meantime, NASA are openly suggesting that China wants to build a base on the moon. The over-the-top version of this is they want to colonise the moon, but imagine that. A Chinese base, not just in space, they already have an international space station, but apparently are still a developing country, which means, of course, they don't have to apply to the same climate rules that places like Australia, the UK or the US does, which, of course, is a farce in and of itself. But as you know, with the Pacific Island situation, wasn't all of this fixed by Penny Wong? When our new foreign minister, newly minted, went over, shook hands, copped some traditional greetings, and apparently everything was going to be okay. Remember how this was taken by the lefty press. The academics who write for the Conversation website said that in the Solomon Islands, Wong takes first tentative steps in repairing a strained relationship. Supposedly, she had got promises from the Solomon Islands that they were not going to allow China to turn their aid into a military base. Well, despite the fact that Penny Wong apparently fixed all of this, the Solomon Islands is being just as belligerent as they were under the previous government. In fact, today, in their Independence Day, no questions were to be taken from the Australian press. There was praise for China, and China has now donated more equipment to the Solomon Islands police force, showing that they are finding again a backdoor way to keep building their influence. So don't buy any garbage and spin that Penny Wong magically fixed everything. China is just as bad as it was last month, last year. They will be worse next month, next year, and the FBI and MI5 are now belling the cat. There's some great detail on that, and I'll get to it in a moment or two's time. Now, I stand by what I've said this week, and it might feel a little too early in a prime ministership to say this, but it doesn't mean it's not true. Two things can be true. You can be a freshly elected prime minister with a 2-seat majority who got a third of the vote with no capacity to get anything through the parliament unless the Greens or Tiffany Teals or crazy cat lady Jackie Lambie are able to get something done in the upper house. And he may well be planning on a 2nd, 3rd and 25th term. But we have seen that Anthony Albanese has a glass jaw. He does not like when anyone wants to upset the apple cart of the awesomeness of the new broom. Remember this garbage he served up earlier in the week?
You know, I haven't been on leave. I haven't had a day off.
Oh, diddums. Now, also, he believes that any form of criticism, like the type you might feel, and certainly that I'm willing to call out on this show, that's truth to power, everyone. You don't cover their ass for years on end. You talk truth to power. And truth to power is this bloke has a glass jaw. Example number 2.
Some people apparently didn't get the memo about the new politics. The new politics is about getting things done and achieving outcomes and working together in the interest of the Australian public.
I'm sorry? Like previously, every federal government didn't try to work with state governments, and state governments end up screwing over federal governments if they're of a different political persuasion? This is ridiculous. But again, apparently, unless you're fully on board, you didn't get the note. Like the people who voted the single biggest support for any party at the last election was the one that is now the opposition, not the government. But apparently there's a new broom. Every single person voted for a change. And believe it or not, he is still sooking 3 days in a row, including in an interview with my mate Andrea Crothers today on Sky News.
I've been working very hard, and not a single journalist and a whole lot of the press gallery were there with us. No one, formally or informally, raised any issues of what was happening or potentially might happen back in Australia.
What? So it's the media's job to apparently whisper in your ear, hey, mate, we understand you need to go to NATO. But the idea that you had to have a $100 million selfie with Vladimir Zelensky that required apparently no phones and no communications, do you believe that, for 2 days is garbage. I repeat, toughen up, princess. I'm sorry that you're feeling a little bit teddy tired after 6 weeks. See me again in 6 months, 6 years or 6 decades like you plan to be the Prime Minister. Normal people who have been suffering under higher interest rates, remember the fastest rise in interest rates and the biggest rise in interest rates since 1994. The largest individual rates 2 months in a row in 22 years. The cost of living that gets worse by the day. They are tired too. Small business where you work for yourself and barely pay yourself, they're buggered as well, mate. But unlike you, they have to earn their money. It doesn't just turn up on the 15th of every month. It doesn't go up as you slide up the political pole. It is not a gift from the taxpayer. Those small businesses that all day, every day, worry about keeping their doors open because they were forced by government to close for 2 years, never forget it. Yet now, supermarkets that have been in families for generations might close because of the increase in power prices. The cost of every one of those small business increases when Anthony Albanese has a brain fart and people have to get a pay rise. Because you see, when you've only worked for the government, it doesn't matter. It's just the pay office deals with it. When you run the local chicken shop, when you run the real estate agency, when you run the lawn mowing business, when you have an ABN, and you might be lucky enough to have somebody help you out as a hairdresser, the only way you can find more money is to get up earlier and go to bed later. So shove your 6 weeks tired, Albo. I couldn't care less, nor could the people who are actually going to have to pay for your largesse around the world, including that $100 million for Ukraine, but $400 for the kids that have been done over by the floods, or $1,000 for the 85,000 people that have been done over by the floods. So please, forgive me if I'm not going to join in the victory lap. Meantime as well, when it comes to the floods of recent times, Anthony Albanese has been very clear to say it's all climate, baby. In fact, he believes that his climate policy of 43% of fixing 1% of the world's problems will magically mean it never rains again.
I went into Ukraine with an electronic blackout. We didn't have phones, we didn't have the internet.
But again, that's him saying he couldn't possibly answer the phone. I apologise. Let's get to the one of Albo claims that his climate policy will save us from floods.
If we continued to not take action globally on climate change, then these events, extreme weather events, would be more often and more intense. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, is that play out.
Now, I know this is what did Al Gore call that movie? An inconvenient truth. Can I show you an inconvenient truth? These are all of the countries and what they produce when it comes to CO2 emissions. Big pink is China, grey is the rest of the world. Both of those, i.e. half of the problem, are not having to do anything before 2030. Keep moving around to the left clockwise. The next one, Russia, which means more than half of the world, India, more than half of the world does not have to do anything serious by 2030. Keep going around clockwise, clockwise, clockwise. Well, at about 5 to midnight, at about 11:55 is Australia. That little orange sliver is 1% of the world's problem, but apparently we're going to fix 43% of 1% of the world's problems. It'll never flood again. Pull the other one, pal. It plays jingle bells. Now, a couple of other things worth mentioning before we get into the Australian news while we stand by for what's about to happen in the UK. Anytime in the next hour, Boris Johnson will appear, Piers Morgan and a whole lot of others will join us from the UK the moment those things take place. But right now, Australia exports more to the world than we import. Now, way back when, it used to be the other way around. This was, of course, called a trade deficit, when you import more than you export. But now we export more than we import. And this has been the case now for many years. Well, guess what? The number one export is at the moment when it comes to the world, when it comes to our natural resources. Dirty, evil, nasty, awful, terrible coal. And why does that matter? Because even the Queensland government recognises that this particular export to the rest of the world pays for everything we do here in Australia. You see, there's only so much you can get out of company tax. There's only so much you can get out of the GST. God forbid, there's even so much you can get out of smokers and petrol cars. Instead, money comes off the resources sector. Now, in Queensland, despite the fact they promised they weren't going to increase taxes, they have increased taxes multiple times on the coal industry, and they are now, to cover their political backside, telling everyone the absolute inconvenient truth. That if you want the hospitals that don't really work, the police service that hopefully turns up, if you want an education system that means you can effectively send your kids to school for free, oh yeah, apart from the $1,000 you have to come up with, or send things like paper or toilet paper like they do in places like New South Wales, you can't do that unless you have government revenue. Now, nowhere in big green energy is there anything that will replace the revenue stream to state or federal government than the resources sector. In fact, there was a fascinating moment that Boris Johnson was confronted with while everything was crumbling around him last night in the UK. He was being asked about his pledge to ban the combustion engine, to effectively move everyone over to electric vehicles. And what would you do with the billions of pounds that the UK government gets from petrol taxes? I'll get back to you. Well, if you want to ban coal, Adam Bant, where does the money come from? Because I know your theory is to just go after millionaires and billionaires, or maybe you could do what they do in Victoria or Queensland, which is to pretend that big business is defined by turnover, not by profit. But make no mistake, you ban this, you stop exporting this, you stop digging this up, there are giant black holes in every state and federal budget for as long as you and I will live. Also worth mentioning too here. Now, you know how the Tiffany Teals did their bit at the federal election? Well, now they're trying to do their bit at the New South Wales and Victorian state elections. But amazingly, one of the freshly minted Tiffany Teals has said, please don't do this because somehow it will undermine my awesomeness. Now, they're still going to do it in the seat that Monique Ryan was able to take off Josh Frydenberg. But they're not going to do it because she believes, that being Zoe Daniel in the seat of Goldstein, that will undermine her efforts as the local MP. Watch this space for a bit of teal on teal political violence. And finally, on this show, we try to adhere to the values that have made Australia the greatest country in the world. Not the most perfect, but one of the greatest countries, if not the greatest country in the world. Those of us who have either in living or direct memory a parent or a grandparent who served this country in World War II. Well, there are plenty of people who are very aged right now who served in World War II, including a bloke in the United States who has just turned 100. And he represents the spirit that we fight for in their honour every night on this program. And his disappointment in the world as it has become, as opposed to the one that he fought for, only inspires me and I hope inspires you.
I've lived a good life. I've had a lot of happiness, smiling, telling everybody that everything was beautiful every day, that the things we did and the things we fought for and the boys that died for it, it's all gone down the drain. Our country's gone to hell in a handbasket. We haven't got the country we had when I was raised, not at all.
That's heartbreaking, but it should steel our spine because we must fight for those who fought for us all day, every day.